October 7th meeting of the Plymouth Planning Board to order. We don't have to do our disclaimer. I will say that the Plymouth Town Hall rules are that anyone who's fully vaccinated, it's recommended that you wear a mask, but it's not required. Anyone who is not fully vaccinated should be wearing a mask, and we are going to try to maintain 6 feet of distance between people while we're in the building. Let's start with a roll call. We are missing Rebecca Hansen, Mike Bouchard, and Steve Whitman. So, and we have our selectmen's alternative, Bill Bolton, Mark Sturgeon.
Here, sorry.
Here, I'm a little late.
Thank you. Carl Evans.
Here.
John.
Yep.
Is it Chris?
Chris.
Thank you. And Susan Wood, alternate?
Here.
All right, I'm going to seat you as a voting member since we are short at least one member, so.
Okay.
And I don't think I missed anybody.
Just Mike is not here either, Mike Ahern.
Yeah, we are
Maybe he'll show up.
anticipating that Mike Ahern may arrive still, but for now Susan is seated for Rebecca. First item on our agenda is minutes of September 16th. Does anyone have any corrections or discussion, questions?
Nothing stood out to me when I looked at them.
Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes of the
Yes.
September 16th.
Thank you, Sue.
I will second that.
Thank you, John. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Mike Ahern is here. There are handouts you're welcome to grab if you need them.
They're all right in front of you.
Oh, okay.
And we are considering the minutes of September 16th. They have been motioned and seconded. Do you have any concerns or comments, edits you'd like to make? Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes as written? Sue?
Aye.
Carl?
Abstain.
John?
Aye.
I will vote aye. Bill?
Abstain.
Abstain.
Mark?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, great. I am going to open the floor to public comments. If anyone from the public would like to address the board.
Just, it's good to be back to the meetings in person.
Nice to see you, Frank.
Matt?
Okay, thank you. We do have communications received. June emailed the board. We did get a request for a site plan, an extension to the site plan approval for Mountain Village Charter School.
I apologize, I forgot to make copies of it, so if anybody needs one, I have one here. But
I have it as well.
I've also got a copy of this somewhere. I didn't hear this. Anybody want a copy?
So we do have a copy of the notice of decision and the notice of the decision from the ZBA. And we should decide if we're going to grant their hearing for, or grant a request for a hearing based on the request.
If I may speak, Phil,
Sure.
I would like to recuse myself from this.
Okay. From this topic.
Yes.
Bill, maybe refresh our memory. Didn't they come in roughly 6 weeks ago
To
asking about
discuss,
this?
yeah.
yeah, I can, let me just make a couple notes here. So what this is really about is, at some point, it was more than 6 weeks ago, I think, went through, I have been going through some of the records of recent planning board decisions over the last couple of years since, before I got here. And there were several applications, different things that, we drove around town, tried to see have they been, active and substantial development occurring, what's the status of these, and, some cases there's been things going on, we've talked to a few people to see what's going on, but this is one that, one of a couple that we found a couple of issues with. Basically, the property for this site plan from back in, I'm trying to remember when the original approval was, April 2020, April 16th, 2020. They're, looking at the files and everything, it is a time period, I guess, that it was right when the board switched to doing remote meetings, so there was obviously some confusion there, and town hall being closed. I'm not sure exactly when town hall closed, but so getting plans in, that kind of thing. So it's my understanding that there was a plan that we had in the files that was very minimal, very kind of conceptual, but that was what we saw with the application, what I found. I wrote to Mountain Village Charter School to inform them that per the site plan review regulations, without anything going on, nothing had happened there at the time, saying, that you needed to, that basically the site plan review was expiring because a year had gone by and nothing had happened.
Active and substantial completion.
Yeah, active and substantial. So in response to that, Frank McLean had come into the board meeting, I can't remember now what month that was, expressed some, being a bit upset about that, obviously. And another member of the board produced a different plan, a little more detailed, that they said they had presented at that April meeting, I guess, when the board made the decision. But even since then, they have gotten an intent to cut and put in a driveway for logging purposes, but have not, and have done the cutting, but nothing else on the property. There's been no real grading or investment in the property as far as I know. I did not go by it today, but so they are, so I had a meeting with Frank after that, because that was one direction we wanted to try to work with them a little bit or see what was up. At that meeting, I said that they should, really come through and request formally, because I couldn't just say yes or no. They needed to bring that. That was on August 4th, I met with Frank. So now it's October 5th. 2 months later, we got this letter. So I just got it the other day, sent it to you. So they're basically, explaining what their reasons are for this. So the process, as I kind of see it in their site plan review regulations, is for you guys, to the planning board, to review a request like this and then decide if you wanted to extend it. It does require a public hearing, and that would have to be noticed to the abutters, and that would have to be at the applicant's expense. I had explained that. I feel like I explained that pretty clearly to Frank, but we did not get any sort of formal, we did not get any payment of those abutter notices yet, so we can't do it for the next, it's too late to notice for the October 21st meeting, so it'll be November 18th at the earliest that we could address it. But they have put the request in as of this week.
So I'm noting, so if the planning board, if we consider this request and have a hearing, which would be early November, that would deal with the site plan, but
Right.
What I'm noticing in the supporting documents you sent out is that the ZBA decision was approved, and that will expire on 12/3/2021. So will they need to turn to the ZBA to ask for a continuation or another special exception?
Good question. I think that they, regardless of which process we end up doing with the zoning decision, I need to kind of look into that still. And and in some ways, it's going to be the same kind of application.
Right.
They need to go to the zoning board and ask for probably another special exception, unless they want to try to ask for this. But it was pretty clear in that notice of decision that the approval expires in 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you were kind of changing a condition is different than asking for an extension.
Right.
I read that as kind of a condition of that approval. So I was thinking of it as they would need to apply again for a special exception for that use. I have not, I believe I talked to Frank about it. I did copy him on the correspondence when I sent it to the board a couple days ago, so he has that. I have not talked to him directly.
Mike, did you have comments?
Yeah, I'm just kind of surprised that to provide them an extension, that we would need to go to a public hearing for that purpose. That sounds very odd to me.
That's what the site plan review regulations say, so.
Can you?
I had it in the email that I sent to you guys too, so. Quite easier if I just find that.
Section 7 of the site plan review regulations. Yeah, in the email it says, approved site plan shall lapse if active and substantial building or development has not begun within 1 year, parentheses 12 months, from the date of the site plan was approved by the planning board, or if a specific condition of approval have not been met within 1 year from the date of approval by the board.
What page?
It's section 7, so it's.
Roman 7.
Wasn't that one of his?
Compliance?
Compliance, yes, thank you.
Wasn't the word substantial one of his major
Yeah.
questions or concerns when he was in here?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
It's on page 6.
But is there a definition for what?
It's
substantial
all,
is?
there's court cases over trying to decide
sure.
that, but, you know, given that their proposal was driveway, parking, building, wells, septic, you know, school, they have not, I mean, that requires spending money, where logging may or may not, you know, if, depending on the volume of wood harvested, that may or may not have resulted in them spending money. I do not know. That would be between them and their logger, but it wouldn't, I mean, I'm assuming the wood has some value, so they did get an intent to cut. I did not look at that to know. So have they really, you know, gotten in there with equipment to start doing grading and drainage and putting in utilities and foundation work or anything like that? No.
Is that a definition in our zoning ordinance?
We don't really have one. You know, it's kind of the thing that should be,
It's something
something we
that's
should probably
relied-
work on as we make decisions about what needs to be done at certain time periods. It's something I've been thinking about a little bit, but, you know, doing, basically, you know, I think it would be very hard to conclude that that's active and substantial development.
Well, it just seems that, you know, when we've gone through the last year or more, what we've gone through, it just seems like you can't get a contractor right now. It's very difficult. They're all busy building homes and putting in foundations from people from out of state. And it's extremely expensive when you can get a contractor. And the kids weren't even in school. We didn't know whether they'd be in school when they were trying to do their plans last year. And it is very subjective on what they've been working on with the whole country shut down during that time. I'd be willing to just grant them another 12 months without having to force them to come in and jump through the hoops and answer questions. And to me, I think we should work with the community, especially in this case, they got their approval and COVID hit shortly after. So I think it would.
From a,
I would just add that the planning board can waive,
Yes.
I mean, the regulations are adopted by the planning board, so the planning board can waive the subdivision site plan review.
I was going to say the same thing. If it's not in the zoning ordinance, it's our policy. If it's our policy, we can waive it if we choose to, but at the same time, I would like to encourage the board to support our staff that has to enforce, you know, standards on a regular basis. It probably is very difficult for our planning department to be able to enforce things that we say if we're going to waive them at any time someone asks us to. That being said, I think we could be more generous in our site plan approvals and give someone 3 years if we need to. But I don't know. We have a decision to make as a board. Do we want to schedule a hearing and request that the applicant submit fees to notice of butters?
Would add in, I do not believe there was a big turnout from the butters at the time.
I don't think there was.
But it also was probably the first meeting on Zoom too, so.
Right.
And nothing came of that first meeting with the butters.
I think we had one, a butter did speak up, but I think she was concerned about the right of way, or maybe that was, I think there's a property owner in between the school and the campground we were considering, and she was concerned about the town wanting an easement recreational trail at the time, but I don't think, there were abutters who spoke at that school hearing. A representative of the property owner for the rental house next door was concerned about appearances. So there was some public comment, if I recall correctly, which in my mind, if we had interest from abutters at the time of the original hearing, we probably should notice abutters again if they're going to consider extensions, but that's just my opinion.
I wasn't here for the applicant to bring his proposal forward, but knowing the school, I believe they use manufactured housing. And was that what they were proposing, to bring in a home where they were going to build?
Yeah, it's a whole new building and,
Brick and mortar, or are we talking?
yeah, I don't,
Their goal was their long-term goal was to build a permanent structure.
Yeah.
Bricks
So
and
they're going
mortar.
to bring in a manufactured house?
No.
No, they were planning on building a bricks and stick-built or site-built structure for the school, but they had talked about a phased approach where they might, my understanding, if I recall correctly, they were talking about putting in septic parking and leaving space for the building, but putting in temporary manufactured housing for schools, for classrooms.
That's what I
Does
remember, too.
Does that sound right?
Yeah.
So they were, if this were the parking lot in school, they were going to put manufactured structures around the edges of the parking lot on a temporary basis until they made the investment in the permanent structure.
So do you remember, Phil, if they had pointed on a map where that permanent structure would go, or would go in the same spot where or would they have to come back
No,
for a building permit?
I think the permanent structure did have a spot,
It did.
and the manufactured housing temporarily would be on the edges of that. So that could be built while the other ones are on the outside of it.
I just realized I do have this in my,
And I don't recall that the plan was very detailed, but maybe, but at the same time, I think it was one of the first meetings we had remotely, and I think it was struggling to have access to the plans.
the revised plan that you got at the meeting, what I was told at least, was there, besides the cover page, there's the existing conditions, and then one page of the site plan.
Proposed.
That's it. There's no drainage plan, there's no erosion
detail,
plan.
Right.
But again, this is a public facility, for housing, it's a school.
Educational facility,
Educational
yeah.
facility, so it will, similar to the childcare facility from Midstate, we had questions, because this is not on I do not believe there's town water here, there may be town sewer.
So,
So they would have to get a well, get that approved as a public drinking water facility, that kind of thing too, so.
so I can understand them not being 100% excited to come back to a different board now with different staff and possibly have to come up with a whole new set of drawings and jump through every hoop that this board now would like them to jump through, and involve engineers and a whole host of other things. When they already got their approval, they just, because of the circumstances, they couldn't go through it and I completely understand that. And I'm not sure how many applicants are in this situation right now, but they got their approval, and I would be, I'd feel awful guilty making them come through to try and get their approval for the second time. And,
I wasn't involved in the first decision, but I did watch it on TV. But I think even though there's like an issue with like pulling forward contractors because they're busy working on out-of-state houses and such, they still could like cut a road in or something that, you know, just got it going, just to be able to establish the fact that they're working toward, you know, that end. So I think.
They do have a road cut in.
Logging
Just for
road, right?
logging.
Logging. Yeah.
That's probably the road that they're gonna use.
But they should have indicated that that's the road that they're gonna use, and they cut it in, but I don't think that's, you know, I think there's no, you know, substantial construction going on, or at least, you know, roughing it in that's actually consistent with the ultimate driveway.
There is a pre-existing road on that property, which is the old road that used to run there.
Okay.
I think it's part of the way the drive is supposed to run.
I think they were planning to incorporate the old road bed in some way. Does it show on there, Susan? Out of a diagonal line, almost parallel to 25.
The other thing I had though was the fact that we could have come in to talk with the town planner, say, hey, we're having some issues here. We tried to lock up a contractor, didn't happen. Just want to make sure that you know, we can go forward, and
I'm sure their minds were on, I'm sure all the parents and all the people involved with that group are, probably had a whole host of other things on their mind during the past year and a half to come in, and I'd say it almost is like it becomes a freeze for 12 months as far as I'm concerned for something like that. And it's up to this board to do the right thing, I believe, and give each applicant that, especially them, where they got their approval just before the pandemic hit, that we should give them some leeway. That's the prerogative of this board, and boy, that's pretty hard for us to now then say, okay, bring your engineers back. We've got a lot more questions to ask you this time. And
I think that, if I recall, I think our approval was only kind of the interim plan of getting parking and temporary structures in, and that they were going to come back with a more complete site plan when they had plans for a building. So I think that was part of the reason we were willing to help them. You know, I think we approved it knowing that it didn't have all of the details of a full site plan, but that they would be working on those and submitting something with a full building later.
And I think they even said that they would be doing that.
Yeah, that was my recollection. So, I mean,
Yeah, the condition, that one of the conditions is that they have to keep a vegetative buffer on the east side, and then the applicant return to the board and present plans showing the permanent building and pedestrian circulation. So they would need to come back when they do the building, so.
right.
But it's, again, the site plan shows, this is where I go to the file to try to understand, it doesn't show just a building, you know, graded, drainage, utilities, well, septic, and temporary buildings. It shows the site of a you know, so they can come back. The other thing is, again, this was granted April 2020, so it's also a little unclear. They're saying, you know, they're requesting the extension for 1 year. Is that 1 year from the 1 year when
April
that came up,
2021?
April, which would be April 2021, or,
Right.
you know, which would take it to April 2022, or is it 1 year from today, or, you know. So I think that would be another thing to make sure you clarify and think about. If it's going to be 1 year from today, you're really giving them a year and a, you know.
Can we
extra
schedule
year and a half.
hearing for
In November, I think 18th, I think is the next time.
November 18th?
But again, you can also not, you know, so.
so my suggestion would be to grant an 18-month extension from when it ran out. That gives them a year from now. And also to remind them at the same time, when you do your permanent building, you need to come back, and like you said when you got your original approval, you need to come back to the planning board and with the site plan approval for your permanent structure.
I feel like it's a very peculiar time, as he said.
It is. It is.
We did lose some time, and it's very difficult with a school like this. They're dealing with a board. They're going to have to put multiple people together, and multiple people aren't going to get together because of the COVID thing. So I feel like the chips were really against them in a lot of ways, and they applied for it at probably the worst possible time ever, but who was to know?
And the other thing is that as, you know, as a charter school, they're just, you know, they've only been in business for a few years. You know, they're still growing their attendance. You know,
Funding was very difficult,
Right.
and I know they rely on a lot of that.
they rely
So-
on parents for the board.
Exactly, so they did outline that in their letter. But I know, working from our own standpoint, it was very difficult trying to get things accomplished, and so I think it was against him.
And one other thing is, we should be encouraging something that's a program to get the kids outside, doing outdoor activities. Those kids spend very little time indoors. And this is what we should be saying, yeah, this is what's necessary right now in today's environment. And say, what can we do to help you to make this easy on you? Not, oh, let's put the brakes on this and get your engineers together and get your retainers all paid up and let's start again. I think it's a slap in the face. We're the same board.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I do want to say at the request, it says extension of 1 year, they're requesting original application be extended for 1 year. In this period, we'll work with the current land use officer and approved plan and to provide the planning board with monthly updates of progress and intentions. So that would also be good to, I don't know if we need it monthly, but
Right.
I would suggest we'd want to, you know, maybe quarterly.
Yeah.
Get some kind of, and have that response. I don't want to have to chase it down. Let's make it clear and give them by the, you know, first of the month, starting in January. We request monthly updates every month in January, April, July.
I'd be okay with
I
that.
think that's fair.
And if they aren't really making any substantial progress, then
Right.
maybe revisit it, kind of say that.
I would like Mike's suggestion of going 18 months as well, just because a 1-year extension puts them in the middle of winter, and I doubt they're gonna have active and substantial development in the next 6 months. And, you know, if we give them another summer, that's a building season.
December, and, you know, December 31st, 2022 or something, you could go till, or
Yeah.
get them through another
So
I
do we
think
have,
that's
do we
fair.
have a motion?
quarterly
I
reports.
would make a motion that we extend the,
Site plan approval?
what?
Site plan approval?
Site plan approval for 18 months with quarterly updates.
Requesting quarterly updates from the applicant. Yeah.
18 months from, or
From the original
expiration of the
expiration date, which would have been
April, was it?
April 2021.
that brings them to about now, next year, so you want.
Yes.
Okay,
That was my intention.
October.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
yeah. It was 4/16/2020. So why don't we give them a date of 10/16/2022?
Yeah, I don't know when that planning board meeting falls on.
Okay.
Close enough, we'll be,
So they have to have active and substantial.
It would be by
progress.
it would at least be by the first meeting of October.
how about we say October 1st or 15th? We'll say October 15th, that's close enough.
All right, so we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Carl. Any discussion of the motion? June, do you feel like you have enough details in what was delivered with the,
And, you know, it's quarterly reports, right?
yes?
And I'll come up with a schedule for them for that.
Yeah, the planning
Okay.
board is going to request quarterly reports.
Okay.
So just an update on the status of January 1st, March 1st, July 1st, October 1st. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oops, sorry.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain?
Aye. Abstain.
All right, moving on from our communications issue, reports of committees, and you're no longer abstaining if we're beyond that issue? Okay, all right. Do we have any reports, June?
No,
Okay. New business,
forgot about that part.
Riverside Landing, we have a conservation easement and a trail easement.
Yes, one more go around about this.
Yep.
The select board get it again on Tuesday, the topic. So I sent you a fairly lengthy memo regarding all this. You've heard me talk about the Riverside Landing conservation easement situation. You know, a few weeks ago, I went to the select board meeting to give them an update at their request, and at that point had been encouraged to try to, you know, work once again to go back to DES, go through the records and everything. What can we do to get a trail on especially the Clay Brook parcel, which is the western, the parcel to the west. And so the memo I sent to you, you know, it's long. I tried to put a little bit of information in there about conservation easements. I also included the easements for you. We tried to suggest, you know, really wanted you to see the conservation easement deed in case you'd never seen one. This is based on a template that New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services uses for wetland mitigation. So again, I've said this before, easements have a lot of different purposes for conservation. In this case, it's about mitigating the loss of wetlands due to the filling and work that's going to be done at the Riverside Landing site plan that you approved back in, I guess it was April or March. So I copied in there some notes I had, some review from some emails, quoted some things just to give you the update of where Riverside Landing and their attorney was in terms of the trail idea, and that they basically are not making the amendments that I had requested because they don't want, I think, the liability of having recreational use in there because of the potential it could have on the wetland habitat, which was the purpose of it. So after I sent this to you, I did have a meeting by phone, just a phone call with Lori Summer from DES on a couple days ago. And we just went back over everything, and she reiterated kind of what I just said. We did talk about one other piece, find my notes from that call here. I told her the town wants a trail. She said, well, again, DES, in issuing the wetlands permit, there's a wetlands mitigation process that you have to compensate for this volume of wetlands that's going to be destroyed, which is 55,560 square feet, so over an acre of wetlands. So that makes it very substantial, a significant impact. So this is where their process says you either need to conserve land within the watershed or as nearby as possible. They try to work with applicants to try to gain permanent conservation in other wet areas, areas with wetlands, which was the path taken in this case. There was another path that could have been pursued, which was a payment in lieu of compensation through developing these types of easements. Applicants can pay a fee to the Aquatic Resource Mitigation Fund, which is a pool of money that the state would have to then towns generally apply for the option to conserve or do something to help protect wetlands somewhere in a watershed.
It becomes grant funding for.
It's basically grant funding.
Conserve or
Yeah.
create watershed somewhere else,
So
in terms of mitigation.
I asked her what that amount would be, and I said, well, if that was the option that had been pursued, then these easements wouldn't be happening, and then there could be the option to have a trail through there. And she said, maybe, yeah, probably, because there wouldn't be any, the conservation easement is the limiting factor for the trail. But, so she did, there's a calculator, so she put in 55,560 square feet, and the payment in lieu fee would have been $246,512.02. So I like the 2 cents. So, very exact. And that money would go to serve for wetland mitigation within the Pemigewasset and Winnipesaukee watershed. So she basically outlined from Lincoln to Alton to Grafton. So it's a very big area. No assurance it would come to, we'd have to apply for a project that we see somehow within our community, which we can do at some point. There may be other funds we're eligible for in there too. So it's kind of, but the way this works is at some point when the application, as I understand it, I believe that what happened is when the application for the wetlands permit went in, then there was kind of this chance from DES, they met and they had field meetings up here with town officials, And at that point, there was sort of this discussion, I guess, about how to mitigate, this. And that the path chosen was to work with the town on these easements. So I did go back once again and found, and I've given a memo to the select board on the 12th. But basically, on March 9th, 2020, at the select board meeting, Brian Murphy presented, was presenting to obtain a final decision on if the town would agree to accept the donation of 2 parcels adjacent to Riverside Landing as a conservation easement, et cetera, and that was voted for in favor of, and all in favor by the select board. And then Brian followed up a couple of days later, writing an email to Mike McGinley saying that the board had voted unanimously to accept the 2 parcels on behalf of the town of Plymouth to be held in conservation easement. This action as part of the major wetland impact application will enable the development of Riverside Landing Phase 2. So finding that email kind of tells me that back in March of 2020, the town made that decision to go forward without knowing really what the document was. So I've put a lot of time into doing best I can. I know there were other discussions with the Conservation Commission. I know there was talk about a trail. Whether it was clear, I wasn't there. So this is the path that the Riverside Landing, as the developer, has pursued, based, I think, on that decision in March from the town. So now that we have these easement deeds, the planning board's job as part of the site plan review is to review them. I mean, we did have as a condition that myself and the planning board chair, Rebecca, and I, we have talked about them a few times. She's reviewed them. I just felt this was a big enough and sensitive enough issue that I wanted the full board to have a chance to see this, rather than just saying, June and Rebecca think this is fine, go ahead. So the next step would be, if this board agrees that these, that this is following the history, the path, the decision, and this is where we're at, then it goes to the select board, and we're going to be talking about it on the 12th. And then the select board, in essence, should kind of, in spirit, sort of say, yes, we've read these deeds, they look good, and then I'll take it to the town's attorney. There's no point having the town attorney review it unless we really are going to push on this trail thing.
So I was just kind of curious about the trail. So it's like, there seems to be a lot of buy-in from the town to actually have this trail happen. I mean, would it make a difference to have those sections of the trail that go through the conservation land be raised wooden trails, pathways, as opposed to ground level, digging in the dirt trails? Would that make any difference?
I did not ask that specifically. I think it still, having supports, would still have some damage.
Maybe allow it to flow more easily, and
there are some sensitive species in there too, so that wouldn't necessarily keep people away from a threatened species.
Got it. Yeah.
DES still considers like if you're doing a shoreland permit, even a deck that would be pervious. If you have spacing between deck boards and rain falls through, they still consider it an impact. Okay. So even a walkway, I'm not sure they would evaluate a raised wooden structure differently than they would if it were a gravel sidewalk.
I was just thinking it would reduce some of the impact. But
I agree that in practice it probably does. I'm not sure that DES considers it differently. I don't know. But
my experience of elevated walkways through wetlands.
They require a lot of maintenance.
One of the places that I lived in Ohio had a section that was wetlands, and they had elevated walkways running through it. It was very popular, and it seemed to do the job beautifully because it just never deteriorated at all. And everything I read about the species that lived in there was no impact on them. So, and I think for Plymouth, two features that I think are underused in Plymouth are the Baker and the Penny.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think those need to be developed in a logical and constructive way to get more people out, like we were just talking about.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, I agree. We have a member of the public who would like to comment, and I'd like to invite your input.
I'm on one of the redevelopment committees, and one of them is recreational, and we're trying to do an inventory on our trail system. But when an applicant, and I've been through a lot of the hearings, like with Mike McKinley on Riverside, where his original plan is to provide properties for commercial development, he was agreeable to a trail system, but his application did not address that. And the lead agency for standards for trails is Fish and Game. Your wetlands issue is with DES. But if you want to comply with the specifications for appropriate design and safety standards for a trail system, is Fish and Games. Okay? Well, he's not in that business, but he was agreeable to allow a system used. Now, the university had done GIS out to that Baker River, and there were several options of location of a trail. And I know the fact that there were many options, but I don't know what they had. But again, if this goes to the appropriate agency like Fish and Game, who's responsible for tourism on trail systems and has the standards for design to evaluate a particular proposed layout, that would help the planning board come to an agreement that is a reasonable use. But this is where I think we've had problems with other large developments, especially Boulder Point, where the applicant has gone in for large-scale development, and then someone said, how about a trail system? And they, well, that's okay, I'm agreeable, but if it hasn't had proper review by the agency having the authority, having jurisdiction, it can't be approved by this board because it hasn't had the right review. And that's why we haven't really progressed appropriately with the resources that we have today.
Thank you. June, did you have a comment or a response?
So I just want to say this is about conservation easements on two neighboring parcels. The Riverside Landing parcel where we had the site plan from this spring, it was conditionally approved, I have that little picture, it's the one in the middle, and we are to get a trail easement area in there, and I've asked multiple times to see a draft of that document. That's going to be on a different parcel. These two conservation easements are on the east and west of the Riverside Landing site. Okay, so that, at the end of my memo here, there are still additional steps the town attorney has to review. We need to have stewardship plans. How does Riverside Landing plan to manage these two parcels? Those always, you want to get those prior to closing on conservation easement deeds. And we also need to get updated baseline documents. Basically, that's an inventory of the resources and the condition of these two parcels. They have two documents. They're both in my office, but they were done, I think, in January 2020. So you always want to get updated ones, and enough time's gone by. So, yeah, so, and DES is very much aware of it. It also needs to get reviewed by Army Corps of Engineers because of the major impacts of this, and the Attorney General, I believe. So
do you need our approval on this, or is it just a notification at this point?
I guess I'm just looking for this planning board to just agree that you've, you understand where things are at, and you recognize that this does, basically Rebecca wrote saying she feels that it's met the condition of having the conservation easement, that you reviewed it. So I just, having even a vote of that would be nice to be able to express that to the select board, that the planning board, and we can have it in the minutes, but there, consensus of the board that this is, if you are, I don't mean to make a decision for you, but that you've reviewed it and you understand and you feel like this meets that condition, and now it's, again, the board can't accept the easement deeds. Only the select board can, so we're doing our part. We'll get the town's attorney to review it at the applicant's expense, and then.
So I think as far as the process, yeah, the planning board can approve that, but I think as far as the original intent of what was supposed to have happened, got misdirected. And I think even in wetlands mitigation, that a path could be approved, through that parcel. That's, I guess, to be discussed, with the applicant. But even in the wetlands, or for wildlife habitat management, they still have a paragraph that you can construct a road, through the area for wildlife habitat management. So, I think like a path and a road or a trail should not be out of the question.
Right.
And I do agree with ultimately having, maybe a mixture of protection of an actual wetland with a boardwalk over, and then a trail through the rest of the area. But that's, again, to be discussed with the select board and the applicant.
Okay. I'm glad we have a member of the select board to update us on that. Thank you.
And DES, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, because again, this document is produced and written and approved by DES, so.
True.
I like Frank's idea to get Fish and Game involved.
Yeah, in addition to, but, the DES is going to have to, sign off on this, and the applicant will have to agree with our.
But the Fish and Game, really, they're the ones with the ideas. They're the ones that are looking for possibilities, where DES is, their baseline is to not have really any use of land and save every turtle, and sometimes they get a little overcautious.
I do believe, though, that in a battle, if you pit Fish and Game against DES, DES is going to win this one. Because, we're seeking DES's approval for us to make this mitigation property, so.
Same state, I bet they'd work well together. And I love Carl's idea about the raised paths.
And I'm 99% sure Fish and Game has reviewed the application for the wetlands permit and the conditions of approval, which is really what this is all tied to, so.
I'm confident moving forward. I think, I think if we need a vote of confidence from the board, I think we can do that.
I'm disappointed by the trail issue, but in terms
agree.
of the conditions of approval, they seem to be met.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am optimistic and hopeful that a resolution creating that would result in a trail could be worked out with the developer.
Alternatives, hopes and dreams of a lot of committees and commissions are going to be crashing down.
So the summary is that the board, you feel like this meets the condition of the site plan?
Does anybody object?
Okay,
I think you have a unanimous support.
thanks.
All right. All right, let's move on to the zoning ordinance. June has quite a selection of updates for us here, starting with non-conforming lot structures and uses, moving on to housing, fences, definitions, and then timelines for zoning ordinance amendments.
You and I can fight about fences.
What's that?
You and I can fight about fences.
I'd rather not fight about fences.
So this is, I apologize again for all this paperwork, but we get used to this for the next few meetings. I
That's
think.
great. Thank you for doing this work to prepare all of this.
So, let's start, just try to take these in, I guess, in order. And my husband reminded me about the Red Sox starting at 8, so that might be something to keep an eye on. But the nonconformity, we talked about that all this at the last meeting, reviewed a couple of things that Susan Slack, let me start off by saying Susan Slack at Lakes Region Planning Commission, who we've contracted with to help in the absence of an assistant planner. I've asked her to really, because she's very competent as a senior planner, and decided that she can really focus in on this. So I've been asking her to give some background and pull some of this together. That's why you're seeing some of the things from her. So she did some of the research on nonconformity. We talked about it at the last meeting. I took those bits and pieces and pulled together this as a draft that I have sent to you. So I'm trying to make this one at this point fairly specific about article and sections that we should delete, edit, change, that kind of thing. So I'm basically proposing a new sort of section 405. We might end up reordering this whole general provisions section, but at least for right now, I mean, the administrative, whether it goes here or there and the number changes, isn't as important as the content. So this is what I want to hear from the planning board. Are you okay with this direction of trying to come up with these new sections for non-conforming lots, non-conforming uses, and non-conforming structures? And then I did go back, because Rebecca reminded me, in section 304, where we have the table of uses kind of in the middle of the table. It had this whole bit about trying to address non-conforming structures and setbacks in this diagram. So I'm just suggesting that was like in a weird place. Why not just
Move
put
it.
in the section about non-conformity? So I tried to bring that in, which means I'm deleting it from the other part. So this is where you do with one thing in one place, you got to make sure you're not causing problems elsewhere. Which, so any comments on this? You can. We don't have to go over it word for word. You have it. You can take it home. We can talk about it again when we get to really narrowing in on complete text.
It looked very sensible and a lot more organized and non-contradictory than it did earlier.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. So we can table this and work on it in our own time and bring it back to our next meeting.
If you have any,
Can I ask a quick question?
yeah.
Sure.
So just back to, probably the summer, I think it was last year, but when we were reviewing potential changes, and personally I think a lot of the hubbub was about changing the lot size requirements in the rural areas from 1 to 3, correct? And there was a lot of people that came and questioned the fact that, well, you're going to make a lot of these lots non-conforming that are there currently.
Great.
How is and I haven't read this yet, so I apologize, but how is the grandfathering in, if we ever did move in that direction, how is that grandfathered in, and is it spelt out in here thoroughly so that people wouldn't be concerned? Because that seemed like a big concern for people.
Yeah, a lot of this deals with it. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think in the past, it was, you could interpret parts of the ordinance to say that any pre-existing lot that was non-conforming was still buildable as long as you meet the setbacks, more or less. And that's in general what you do, and that this is just kind of reordering it, updating the language a bit to make that more clear, and taking out any conflicting areas, and then later trying to define what we mean by those setbacks and where you can, because there was this other provision of trying, as long as you try to do it along the front building line and the front setback, depending on the situation, you can do that by special exception rather than a variance. Because it's sort of unique to this town's approach
So,
with it,
so in theory, I have 10 acres right now, I have 2-acre lots on it. We go to this 3 acres, as long as I've had the approval to build on those 2-acre lots, I'm good?
Even if you don't have a building permit in, yeah, you can go back and get it, yeah. So it's basically, because those lots were created and they were conforming at the time.
Do you have the 2-acre lots, or you
I'm just- this is
anticipate?
Hypothetically.
Hypothetical.
Okay, no,
To
but-
answer some
Yep.
of the,
Yep.
that's what I gathered
Yep.
were some of the major concerns.
They will have had to have created those lots
Correct.
before
It
that,
can't be
yeah.
a singular 50-acre lot, or a 10-acre lot
Yeah.
right now.
If you wanted to then later subdivide your 10 acres, if you hadn't done it yet, then you'd have to make it 3-acre lots, not 2.
Yep.
Where is that verbiage in this?
We're just
1 to 2?
hypothetically talking
Okay.
numbers, we're not,
All
yeah.
right.
I mean, going with what the existing zoning is, I mean, if you had a half acre, you could still build on it when you, because of the, in like the, more rural, the agricultural zone, because it's 1 acre is required. But if you only have half an acre, you can still build on it. And
But you
that's
still wouldn't be able to get, you may not be able to get a septic system or a well, or,
Yeah, provided you can get well, septic, and
Which
a
the state-
structure could meet the setbacks. You still have to meet the setbacks, that's the harder part, potentially.
so there's still protections.
Yeah, yeah. And that's really by law. This is just a cleaner way for us to be able to administer this stuff. as much
Can I
as
actually ask a question? And I might be fuzzy on the current, I didn't actually reference back to the current document. I thought in the current document there was a distinction between properties damaged by some kind of disaster like a fire or something and ones that were demolished. And it seems to be kind of lumped together here. Am I right in that?
Oh, I mean, a use that ceases, like if there's a non-conforming use that's ceased.
Versus like
Yeah.
something catches fire and you rebuild.
Yeah.
And I thought they were distinguished before, and they're not distinguished here. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't quite remember. But is there a reason to not separate them out, like demolished and just destroyed by a fire or something?
Yeah, there was a section in there about damage by fire of a non-conforming use, and I think that is still,
I think now it just says destruction or demolition.
I can double check on that. That might be a good catch.
I don't know if it makes a difference, but
Let me, rather than trying to figure it out here on the fly,
Yeah.
is that okay to just, that's a good point to
we're
go
gonna
back
spend 2
in.
hours right now.
Back to it again.
But the other thing that combined with this is abandonment
Yep,
of a structure,
yes.
whether it's,
Or
especially when it's
abandonment
damaged
of a
by fire.
structure, or abandonment of a use.
Well, then those are two different things, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you have a non-conforming use and the use stops for a year, it can't be picked up. That non-conforming use can't be reinitiated at that point. But
Non-conforming structure can be picked up again after a year if there's something preventing you from building in that time period. And that's in here,
okay.
So under non-conforming
like
uses,
insurance issues or something.
Yeah.
this does say here on page 1, discontinued use. So if a non-conforming use is discontinued for a year, but or superseded by the conforming use, but we should probably put in something about except by fire.
Well, I think under destruction or demolition, it's written very generally. Like the proposed language in 40532 says, a non-conforming structure which has been destroyed partly or completely may be rebuilt with the following limitations. Now, it doesn't specifically address fire.
They're lumped
It could be an
together.
earthquake, it
Yeah.
could be a tree falling on it. I mean, I don't think we need to be specific about how things get destroyed.
Well, there is a difference between purposefully destroying a non-conforming structure and,
In rebuilding, though, there's not.
I guess it's not, okay.
Because you could intentionally,
As long as you're building in the same place, you're good.
if you could intentionally tear down a non-conforming structure and rebuild in the same,
Okay.
as long,
Make it
within
more
that same
energy
period of
efficient,
time.
or,
Yeah, okay.
make it
Yeah,
look different or something,
right.
if it's rotten.
You can't enlarge it, but like you could rebuild in kind.
Yeah, okay.
So I think it's in there, it's just kind of,
Yeah.
So there is also an
Sometimes it's better to
abandonment
be more
section
general.
that we've recently dealt with, and actually that's another piece we're gonna try to tighten up. We're gonna try to, Scott Whedon has been looking into abandonment, especially by fire,
Yep.
and trying to strengthen our text around that too.
Yeah.
But that could be a conforming structure that's abandoned after a fire.
Here's one that I haven't really considered. A non-conforming seasonal use may not be expanded to a year-round use.
Yeah, that was one that we had talked about, do we want to have that or not? We thought maybe we should just keep it in there, because of, there could be well, septic, that kind of thing. But we can take that out. That was
That's an
really a
interesting-
holdover from,
I'm not-
because one of the
yeah.
samples was from one of the lakefront community, so we could take that out.
Trying to think about enforcement of how you would do that, because sometimes people just change their use and don't really tell anybody. I mean, my question for you is, do you want to be responsible, do you want the town to be responsible for enforcing something like that?
Yeah, who's going to be policing that all the time? Because that
That's a
could
hard
be,
one.
that is a hard one.
Yeah.
We have Scott Whedon now, so we're cool.
With that?
We have Scott Whedon, so we're cool.
So we can take that one out. That was one I
well,
think we had kind of
that's a
left
good-
up in the air before. so.
Maybe
Well,
don't
think
take it
about
out
it till
yet,
next
but,
time.
yeah, I mean, draw your,
Think about it.
think about
Yeah.
it. Think about the situations where it might be useful.
And I think people are changing the use from short-term because they're buying them when they can and staying away, renting it out, making the money, and then they move back here because this is where they want to end up. So I think that's happening more than not.
Well, again, it's not, you can come and stay seasonally and as a residence and convert it to a year-round residence. That's not, because we allow that. It would be more like if you're having a, store in a residential area season in the summertime and not in the, and then you want to convert that to year-round or something.
Something like the ice cream stand in front of the Common Man or something like that. Like they couldn't, like if that's within a setback of the highway, like they couldn't build a permanent restaurant there. Something like that.
That's weird.
That That might be a
That makes
more
sense.
That's a use,
relevant.
we're talking about a use versus a structure, see, that's the thing.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
this is uses here.
That's why this is really confusing,
Oh,
because you have
yeah.
lots, uses, and structures.
Right,
Why don't you think about it?
Yeah.
It might be simpler just to take it out. I can,
yeah, maybe.
that's what I'm thinking. I'm gonna make a delete mark on the next version.
Well, I mean, you could make that argument for that. Let's say they wanted to serve food out of their structure that they currently serve ice cream out of, but they wanted to do it year-round. It's a change of use without changing the structure, right? Like, they could do that, but this,
Provided that serving ice cream is not a permitted use,
yeah,
so.
well, maybe they want to do hot dogs in the winter. I don't know.
Soup.
Or those waffles.
Soup.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of examples where that, like, I'm trying to think
It's
of
hard to come up
a
with
use,
one.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it would be so rare that it's not worth sweating over, yeah.
Well,
It's simple.
I want to be respectful of time of Red Sox fans in case they want to get out of here too. So. Should we move on to housing?
Sure.
Oh, that's a small issue.
What's that?
That's a small one.
So I also sent you a number of documents from Susan. She, partly because she had watched the video from when we had the presentation a couple meetings ago about housing, and we had some discussion about affordable housing, workforce housing, that kind of thing. So she dug around and looked into some examples of workforce housing. I did have a conversation with her about it, and our conclusion, I'll just tell you right up front, was that to try to adopt some kind of workforce housing ordinance at this time for Plymouth was just, she's like, it's too much, too fast. Maybe next year, or a few years out. And the reason why is that part of the workforce housing statute in New Hampshire basically says that every town has to provide its fair share of that type of lower cost housing for essential workers, that kind of thing. That's called workforce housing. The law's been around a little over 10 years or so. But in order to know if you're meeting your fair share, you have to do a good housing inventory. And we don't have that, and the region doesn't have it. So all the planning commissions are embarking on, they have recently gotten some, there's never been funding given for this, but there has now, I don't know, someplace they're getting some funding at. So she said over the next year and a half, the RPCs are just getting started to work on developing some standardization about doing housing needs assessments. So she's going to be working on it, I understand, is my understanding, for Lakes Region Planning Commission. So she felt like, at that point they can engage with us, we can dig into this a little bit better, think about all that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. So while there was a lot of information here, I think it's important that you try to, understand that the workforce housing really, she said there's no workforce housing police out there checking on every town. Really, it's an incentive-based program to try to find ways to encourage that type of reserving some units for certain income levels is the idea. And you create incentives by giving developers more density, more units per building, more units per lot. You find different ways. Density award is usually the best one, as long as they agree to make a certain percentage of units for a certain income bracket. All right. They can do that without us having it, and so that's not a concern. I asked her, do you think we are complying with the statute? And she said maybe, without knowing the inventory.
I thought we had something in our.
I feel like we
in our
probably are pretty
regulations
good.
that addresses it
Yeah,
already.
she said in looking at our zoning ordinance, she said she doesn't see anything that is prohibiting a developer from
Right.
developing lower, units that are designed for lower income people. And we can call it workforce, you can call it subsidized, whatever bracket you want to, low, moderate income, workforce, whatever kind of label you want to put on it. She doesn't see anything. She said there's a lot of other towns that will say you have to have X number of acres, you have to have, some sort of something in your regulations. She's like, she does not see that in Plymouth. The only thing being this 6-unit limit is the one area where we probably, we talked about this, that's kind of where we're zeroing in on it. Because she said there is efficiency that comes from having, maybe 18 units in a building. There's maybe more expenses too, because something like that you pretty much need to be on water and sewer, so it limits where you can put it. You'd have to have, I think, a sprinkler system, which makes them safer, So if we wanted to pursue that, I think that is for us to focus on right now. The better solution is to look at, do we want to just create the opportunity to have more units per building in some zones? So I took a look, so that the information she sent out is there for you to have kind of for reference. The handout I just gave you tonight is really, I lost my copy of it.
That one?
Yeah. Maybe it's this one. Let's take your copy. I went through and tried to look at, so this is multiple pages again. So basically, the table you have there shows that multiple dwelling units of 3 to 6 units is only by special exception in most zones except for village commercial where it's outright permitted. I pulled out that, rather than thumbing through the ordinance, I tried to put all that in front of you. So basically we say you can have residential uses above or below the street level. So you're keeping that first floor for office or retail space, which is common practice in a downtown area like ours. And so the question would be, do we just want to just change that to be multiple unit dwelling of greater than 3, by special exception, perhaps in all zones? It might make it just simpler. The other option would be make it by conditional use permit, which is, we'd have to come up with the conditions, and the difference is the conditional use permit's issued by the planning board. The planning board would see anything over 3 units as multifamily housing anyway through site plan review. So it could be just kind of straightforward to keep it as a special exception from the zoning board. We could add additional guidelines for special exceptions. On the very back page is the criteria, the general criteria for special exceptions. So you see that they're very broad, they're good statements, but they're hard to say, oh yeah, that really is a nuisance, or that really isn't appropriate. How do you define that? So I think that's something for you guys to, again, I'm just giving you this tonight to take home and kind of read over, hopefully, and I can email this out to the board members that aren't here, to just kind of think about how that might look in the ordinance if we were to go more than 6 units. What's the rationale for having just 6? I don't, unless it's student related, I don't know. Is it time to just take that upper limit off to help encourage in some places some bigger residential opportunities? Combined with this memo here and everything, I brought in all the ADU stuff because there's some, I think the ADU component is fine that we have. I might want to reorder it again, put it in a little bit different place within our general provisions because it's sort of stuck in a weird spot. We have some good guidelines for what you need to, criteria for issuing the an accessory dwelling unit. The only thing is then there's standards for accessory family dwelling, which I think is old and archaic and isn't really an ADU because that meant a family member had to be living there. So we don't even have that definition anymore, so that part should probably be taken out.
Yep. One of the,
Mike had a question.
a couple of questions, but one of the things that's in the back of my head is there's that new unit that was built down by the river behind Main Street.
Yes.
And I'm looking at that, and I, on the one hand, appreciate keeping more parking off the street and out of big paved parking lots. On the other hand, there's a part of me that says having an entire first floor that's nothing but parking with no real sense of entryway, community interaction, and connection is a problem. And I'm wondering, as we consider larger units, if we can also consider that design aspect of how we deal with the different floors and parking in a not a complicated way, but in a way that can prevent that sort of functional but not very community-oriented construction.
And that would be, we could have some criteria, whether it's for a conditional use permit or a special exception. So when you have special exceptions, you have general criteria, and then for specific types of uses by special exception, you can develop specific criteria. If something is a use that might be really noisy, you can set a certain decibel level it can't exceed. You could say in a we tried to address it by you can't have it on the, residential on the first floor, they got around it by putting parking.
I think that might be the ag zone there, actually.
It's flood zone.
Or flood, okay.
Well,
Well,
it's
it's still-
ag zone too. No, actually it's not.
No, it's village commercial.
Is it built still village
That was,
commercial?
I think that was a concern, is that
Okay.
That's how it got
you're
away
gonna
with
get
it.
flooded out.
Okay.
Well, the intent was retail, office,
Yeah.
Parking.
So that's another area,
Yeah.
though, when site plan review, could we, how does a conditional use permit, this board can address that with site plan review. So in one, the conditional use permit's more about the use, where site plan's about the site and the design. So by kind of bringing those two together isn't a bad way, because in some, it might give some more clarity, so we can, but we need some input like that, which is really helpful to know what those criteria should be, Someplace else that might be okay, There's a lot of townhomes that have, some parking and,
Yeah.
June, do you know how many structures we have with 6 units currently in town?
no, we don't have a good inventory, yeah.
You
We don't really know. The one that I have gone, I just went and drove around off of Fairgrounds Road, the Plymouth Woods, there's 4 buildings of 6 units each.
Is that the workforce housing?
I don't know, I haven't dug into the files to know exactly. It was when Hannaway and Jeff Brown and.
Yeah, that's the
FICO,
workforce
yeah.
housing.
It is
Is
a
it workforce?
definitely, okay.
We
We
approved
already
that.
have, yeah.
Do you remember, Bill, you were on that? They came in
Subsidized, yeah.
They came in with state attorneys, and we were warned certain things you can't say, and their attorneys were ready to. Miriam Bader was the planner at the time, and very good planner, but it was quite interesting to be on the planning board during that time when they came in. So I was, you drive through Laconia and you see a couple of those high-rise buildings with many units in them. And, I really like Plymouth's look and its feel. And, there's a reasons a lot of these things are written and the way that they are. And that's why we love Plymouth so much, is a lot based on this book. You start changing this book too much, and it's not Plymouth anymore that we've come to love.
Well, we still have a height restriction. We still have a height restriction.
Yeah, but you start putting in more than 6 units, it starts to look like some of the Laconia buildings, whether it goes out or stays within the 35 feet.
There was, what was that workforce housing thing that went on? There was like a,
Bristol?
no, well, so there was like a Zoom call. I don't know. And, they were showing the projects that were approved for like workforce housing. And there was like one that was like, really beautiful, actually. Actually, a couple, and like single-family houses too. So I don't think there will be an issue putting, not restrictions, but at least, desired design, finishes on certain projects, and it wouldn't look like a Laconia high-rise, So, I think it's just a matter of properly managed workforce housing project.
And, we've gotten workforce housing here. We've got the subsidized project on
Fairgrounds.
Fairgrounds Road, and then
Yeah.
you've got Plymouth Woods, which was the more recent one. So I don't think there's any obstacles for them coming to Plymouth. I would caution going more than 6 units for housing, unless there's a.
You were on I think the planning board when that project was out in Langdon Woods, or whatever.
Which one was
I
that?
think you were there. It's kind of stuck in my mind that it was a really neat project that was going to be for either, dormitory, not really, or / apartment. And it was something like 30 or 40, apartments. Just a beautiful use of that space that nobody else could use. And it went down because of zoning. But I still think we should be able to accommodate.
Well, we do have a dorm
Yeah.
that's allowed.
This was like almost like, single family, housing.
I guess I wasn't on the board then.
It was a pretty sweet project, but it just went down in flames. So-
College is exempt from zoning.
What's that?
Isn't the college exempt from zoning when?
They are, yes, they are.
Yeah. So,
This was a
They
privately
can
owned.
build 50-unit dorms if they want.
They could, but this was like a privately owned piece of property with a good project that was gonna go on it, but failed, so, the zoning.
I mean, the other option would be to change it from 6 to 12 or 18 or 10 or, I mean, that, so it kind of gets to Mike's point of not letting it get
Yeah.
too out of hand, but try to have an option in case somebody wanted to build a little more. I think the feeling is, from what I understand when hearing the Carmen from Lakes Region Community Development, that they need more units per building to make it affordable. The cost of building is so high. So I don't know what that magic number is, and every site's different, so there is no, because the site work the engineering of just the site and layout and drainage and utilities could be so high in some site that no matter how many units you put in there, but they need to get sometimes a building that, so I think that's really what there's no magic number, but.
Well, there's also environmental efficiencies of having larger buildings that share walls and such.
And there is a move to smaller units now too,
I mean, we could go to 12, and a 12-unit building still has, presumably it'd be 3 stories because we're still under 35 feet. You can do 4 units per floor in a building and still have some nice character.
I don't know why to limit it if the right project comes around and we have a review process.
Yeah,
It would still be a review process, and
good point.
I think there's a reason they had 6 units. Again, I think it's the flavor of Plymouth, and we all came to Plymouth because we love what it is, and, very easily we can make changes to zoning, and that's what we're tasked to do if we choose to, and then pretty soon we lose Plymouth. So I think our job, we can't take this lightly. This is a very important job that we have to try and keep Plymouth the way that it is. And you put 6 people and they vote in favor of making some changes, and pretty soon Plymouth isn't Plymouth anymore. So we have to really be careful, and there's a lot of weight on our shoulders to make sure we make the right decisions for Plymouth. Not just for the board, but make the right choices for Plymouth.
But keep in mind that all of that weight is not on our shoulders exclusively. We make recommendations and we put them to voters, and voters have to approve changes to zoning. So it's not exclusively our responsibility. If we take a pulse of the town and recommend that we think we should allow 12-unit buildings, and we put it to the voters, and the voters say, no, we don't like that, then we still have 6-unit buildings. So, that's the process. We don't have to do all or nothing. I mean,
And there's public hearings, and
Yeah,
we
right.
can change 6 to 12 to 18 or 10 or whatever. I guess I think.
What I would,
I guess the only other thing I would suggest to keep in mind too is that condominiums, even townhouses, there is this limit of no more than 6. So you're kind of, even if they're big, and not knowing what future development plans might be at Tenny Mountain, if there was going to be some place like that where, or anybody, which is again, sort of an efficient way of building.
Mm-hmm.
There's been some talk on Tenny Mountain Highway of some condos and and so, again, we can't allow more than 6 units per building. So it affects a variety, it may be higher end homes too,
so I would like to re-examine the method that we're going about coming up with changes. And a few months ago, we talked about having a subcommittee with Carl and Sue and myself and I think John. And I loved that idea, but we've kind of delegated it to this person. Is she from Plymouth, or where is she from?
Susan Slack? Are you talking about?
Is that who it is, Susan? I don't.
She's a professional
her.
planner. She's a consultant.
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
I just have to say, Mike, we're not delegating it to her. She's contracted with the town in the absence of a planning assistant. We have her for 10 to 15 hours a month. So, and anything she's doing is under my direction, and we talk about it all and pulling this stuff together. So she's not off just throwing this stuff out that,
So what I would like to see,
yeah.
She's making recommendations to us as a board for us to decide.
Gathering information.
So we don't have to
right,
accept anything she says, but these are recommendations based on her work and her knowledge of other towns.
right. So I would rather see a different methodology. Whether we go back to the original group and we know this town best. She does know other towns. She probably doesn't know the rumblings of, and maybe the town doesn't even know why they don't like the zoning. We're kind of a special town, and we've done some pretty good things to make our town as special as it is, and it's pretty easy to come in and say, and I've warned the planning board before, it's very easy to make changes and come up, oh, that sounds great. But the methodology that I would pick, if we don't use that committee, is to put together a group of people, citizens that want to show up and brainstorm some ideas. What do you not like about Plymouth? Rather than, oh, well, Bristol or Newmarket or whatever has these things, I think we should do this. Let's find out, we don't need to make changes just to make changes. Let's find out what's not working in Plymouth first, and then go from that methodology. And I think we're heading down a road that, yeah, it sounds good, but we don't know the consequences later. And I would love to see this board sitting with a group of people and a big whiteboard or a chalkboard and say, what can we improve on Plymouth? And there may be that board is completely empty at the end of the night, and we say, all right, I guess Plymouth is pretty good. Or you may see some really good suggestions from some of the people that are out there, and you may see a consensus among the people that are out there about something that's really necessary. And I think that's the methodology that we're missing right now. And Susan Slack, and I don't know her, I have no qualms about her, but I just think that we are approaching this completely wrong.
I just want to point out that Plymouth is not frozen in time. At some point, a decision was made that allowed a whole lot of big box stores to move in on Tenny that create a lot of revenue and bring people into Plymouth. And maybe that was or was not the right decision, but that decision was made. And so we're allowing like Walmart to be in here, making a whole lot of money. And what we're talking about now is expanding opportunities, and it's not going to be that size, I really doubt. Any housing development that we're talking about is not going to be as big as Walmart or something, but opportunities for regular people to actually be able to afford to live here. And I mean, so we've already changed the landscape of Plymouth quite a lot, and we do have to be careful about that. But it's not like Plymouth is the same place it was 50 years ago. It has changed. And who does that change benefit? And we're talking about benefits that could go to moderate income people. And that seems worth considering.
So would you be opposed to have her have some kind of public input?
So this is the forum for public input. I mean, we can invite, we're discussing zoning changes, like we have one member of the public here. I mean, I'm not in favor of creating a lot of subcommittees that require these us as board members. I mean, we are ultimately responsible, and I'm not really interested in delegating a lot of questions out to other people. Like, I think we can have hearings. Like,
We're mandated to.
We actually, sorry. So we did a plan for town of Plymouth, and we had not charrettes, but we ended up like inviting hundreds of people to develop, the town master plan, and that's all documented. So we've kind of already been through that process as far as.
We did it for Tenny Mountain Highway at the senior center, probably.
Well, that wasn't that long ago.
8 years ago.
And God forbid we have to do it again this quickly, but like maybe we'll target every 10 years to do that process. But yeah, we've we got a lot of good ideas and developed a master plan because of it.
I mean, our guidance should be the master plan. I mean, that is the document that should guide all of our decisions.
Right.
And we should be looking to that for our, and soliciting public comment.
And it does specify density in certain places in there and lack of density in other places, and, yeah.
That's what I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, I appreciate the idea of public input, but I think that that's what the master plan is. So we're at a point where.
And that's why we have public
time
meetings.
is, we also only have so many meetings. We've been trying to do this in terms of juggling everything else. This board's been very busy with some applications, up until the last couple meetings. So now is a time, luckily, where we can sort of focus in on some of this. So, I think this is a discussion, and it's nice to see somebody here popping in, I guess.
Is
But,
there anybody that would be against having public input on potential changes that we're looking at making?
Not only are we not against it, it's mandated.
Yeah, there'll be a public hearing on all this, so.
No, I'm saying at the beginning stages, not
So
at the final ends of
We
the
don't
stage.
have anything to present to the public right now. We're not having a hearing on changes.
No, I'm-
We're starting to talk about some of the deficiencies in our zoning ordinance and ways we can move forward to clarify them. And we're trying to keep it pretty simple and easy so that we can get it done this year. We will clearly have public hearings on any proposed zoning changes. That's what the calendar is for. If we're going to have zoning changes for this year, we have to have them defined and written, we have to have public hearings, and these meetings are open to the public. I see Matt with his hand up, and I plan to call on him in a minute, because I want to have his input on this as well, too. Even though we're not in a public hearing on this right now, I know Matt's been very interested.
In order to help come up with a more concrete idea, we have to have these kinds of discussions.
We do.
And we can do it by a committee, but a committee's gonna be about half the board. So to me, it's more efficient to get everybody's input and the public all at once, as much as that can also be
agree.
messy. I need to get some direction from this board about how you would like to see an amendment, if you want to. I can tell, and I've told you before, several times, I've had conversations with, two people that are making significant investments in town. Both are interested in housing, and the 6-unit has been raised as a concern. So that's one reason from hearing it from that side without revealing, it doesn't really matter whom, but there's been 2 people interested in other phone calls, some of which somebody called without revealing who they were working for, asking about this kind of stuff. So I think that kind of going to what John said is there are changes out there about affordability, about the cost of doing developments, about higher density, that we should be looking at it. We don't have to do it. We can do it and still keep very tight controls. My recommendation is to think about raising that 6 to maybe 10 or 12 or 18 or some kind of 20, I don't know, something, and thinking about what are the criteria that would allow you to go over the 6. Is it going to be height? Is it going to be the look and feel of it? Is it going to be the overall size? Is it going to be affordability? That kind of thing. And we don't know that yet. So if we set up some good criteria, we can maintain, I think, and avoid the concerns you have. But we're just not there yet. So let's not say no without thinking it through.
And I'm thinking about the buildings that Bill was talking about that we looked at in that Zoom presentation last month. For some reason, most of the newer structures around the Plymouth area look like they were built by the same people that built Walmart. They're long, rectangular, and ugly. And that isn't necessary. Some of those buildings, you could have 6, 8, 10, 12, 18 units in those buildings, and you're not going to know there's that many in there because they're well-designed, well-constructed, and give privacy to people instead of looking like tenements. And I think that's one of the things that we ought to be looking at. Another thing is how to get more people in here. We should be able to have 2 or 3 places around town to put up simple messages. There's a planning board meeting. This time, this is what we hope to discuss. Please attend. Something in downtown, something out in a central location on Tenny Mountain, and as much as some people hate this, someplace on campus. The students live here. And ought to have the ability to voice their opinions.
I'm going to take a minute and allow some public comment since we have a couple of members of the public who'd like to speak. I'm going to start with Matt Yetton, who's on Zoom. Matt, are you able to?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yep, go for it.
All right, excellent. So just 3 different points I just want to comment on. One, I sort of missed it when you guys were discussing it. I didn't clearly understand it, but there was some discussion about multifamilies from 3 units to 4 units, and like that being the line or something right there. I did really I just want to insert the comment that just be aware that if we're dividing, putting a division line of some sort of multifamily tag between 3 and 4, it goes contrary to popular, financing for investors and real estate. People that are looking to get into real estate, that 1 to 4 unit is considered residential, and then 5 and over are considered multifamily. So just looking at like investors who might be interested in building a 4 unit in our community, their funding might be significantly changed from 1 to 4 to 4 to 5. I'm sorry, 1 to 4 and 5 more.
We're not in that part of the discussion yet, but okay. I appreciate the feedback.
So the second is also know that I lost my train of thought. Well, we'll go to the third point is, the whole thing with the state of New Hampshire and Lake Region community developers coming in and talking a few months ago, they are for building subsidized housing. And I know they talked shortly about workforce housing, but even when I questioned the guy from the state on, can you define affordable housing? And he smirkly says, well, I didn't define that for a reason. Well, I know you didn't define it for a reason because he's talking about subsidized housing and not affordable to what most people say, oh, it's affordable. Oh, someone making $50,000 could buy this place. It's affordable for the person. That's not what it is. I think it's very betraying to the community for these developers to be giving presentations to us on subsidized housing. And we should boil it down and say that's what it is. They did talk a little bit about workforce housing, which requires more federal requirements to meet that. But pretty much what they want to do is build more subsidized housing in this area. And I'm not saying that's a positive or a negative. I'm not here to inject an opinion on that. What I'm here to question is that housing what's best for the tax base of this town to build the tax base and build the revenue in this town, as well as support the local businesses in this community. So that's just a question I had. I just want to share with the board. Thank you for letting me jump in and just interject my thoughts right now. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. Frank, do you want to jump in?
I was on the planning board when we initiated the master plan system back in '83. My office right now, I have a project which has been described right here. It's called All in the Name of Plymouth. And I've inventoried all of our businesses because there are 1,180 industries. They're broken down into 20 sectors. Plymouth has the fortunate part of having one industry in each sector. The problem we're having is the downtown area, which I have a map in 1900, where a predominant number of buildings were built. There were no codes and standards for anything at all. Codes and standards for electrical came in 1903. Fire codes 14. All the code systems that you're trying now to have to deal with in order to approve something and somebody complying with a simple thing like, well, I did parking. Now, there's 4 agencies having the authority, having jurisdictions. Our the Code of Federal Regulations, believe it or not, state RSAs, municipal ordinances, and industry standards. So for 2 white lines that we have out there, it costs us $150 a year to maintain that. And it has 4 regulatory compliance issues. Now, if you've got something more complicated than 2 white lines, it's got a lot of compliance issues. Housing, those same code, authority having codes, jurisdiction. The 2 principal codes is the National Fire Protection Association and the insurance agency. The problem is when an individual files for a particular labeled housing down in Concord as a business, that goes into a 6-digit code. Now for compliance issues, we are a town that does International Building Code. It has a description of that particular type of housing. To get approved by life safety and fire codes, it has another one. Okay? Now the problem is you have technical infeasibilities where trying to comply with all these various descriptions from different authorities having jurisdiction to control, i.e. whether you do it or not, gets very confusing and very expensive. Now, the issue, the difference between Tenny Mountain is all of the properties out there have been subdivided that they can mitigate all of their infrastructure on their property. You cannot do that downtown. Main Street, there's not one building business that has on-site capability of mitigating parking, water, septic. This building, the federal building, the post office, any one of these others do not have sufficient land to mitigate their issues on site. Now we have to go off-site. Simple thing, parking. We got to do off-site parking systems. Totally different element. And the problem in my review of the last 40 years of our planning board and plans is that we have these overlapping jurisdictional elements that we need to acknowledge and say, okay, how do we reevaluate the hardest part, which is our downtown area, which the downtown area has 7 zones in it. Okay, so now for a simple thing for parking in the downtown area, you've got 7 different specifications. All right, so
Frank, can you finish up in
Yes.
in 1 minute?
Anyway, my office is, my work has been the last 3 or 4 years is to address the downtown area for economic development. And I have 40 years worth of plans, and the Green Street Plan of 95 is the one I'm working with now. And there are groups downtown area that are trying to do the same, and we do need to, like Mike commented, is to bring the issues of infrastructure to a discussion as to how do we go forward to address them. And that's our key problem we're having right now.
Okay, thank you. I think we're getting a lot of good input. I think we're really getting ahead of ourselves in terms of how important it is tonight. June is really trying to get big picture guidance from us as a board on how we can move forward, and I think we've gotten a little too deep already, so.
I would caution the board that we're trying to make changes not unlike how changes to the ag zone were started in the process to do that. And we found out there were a lot of the townspeople were not happy. And I realize this board, probably amongst all of us, probably has 20 years in the town that we've lived here, with the exception of Sue and I. But there's probably 15, 20 years that you guys collectively have lived in Plymouth. And maybe less, I don't know.
I resent that. 1959.
Put Concord for you. So I think that we are going about this in a way that's going to come back and bite us later. And I'm very concerned about this process. I think that we need to get in front of this with the townspeople and get their input on what they would like to see, what's broken, what they would like to see changes with the ag zone, and go from that approach rather than, hey, we've got a call from someone and they want to see a lot of units, more than 6, so let's change it and let's just get it to a town vote. I'm a little concerned about this process, more than a little concerned, I'm a lot concerned.
But to repeat Bill and Phil, I mean, this is why we had the master plan work, where we got that input, and the job...
Where is it in the master plan?
The job now is to start to implement some of that input in terms of where we want density and...
Where does the master plan say we need more density than 6 units?
It doesn't, I don't believe it mentions the number of units. It does mention density, though, as one of the issues.
So I would like to see a charrette of some sort, find out what people are seeing for issues in Plymouth, and let's go from there. If there's no issues and the blackboard is pretty much empty.
I'm not interested in redoing the master plan right now. I mean, it gets redone every 10 years by statute, and we use that master plan to make recommendations in between.
But you made recommendations to go from 3 acres to 6 acres, and I don't know where that came out in the master plan, but I really think that we're going down the same road that we did, or that you guys did a while back, and I'm concerned.
Okay.
Want to hear from Matt?
Well, I'll just add to that. I mean, I hear what you're saying, right? I think that what June is trying to do is, at least from her work and the lady that she's working with, or that's working here 15 hours a week, they're proposing things that we might potentially want to address. I agree with you, especially with the 6 unit. You know, if it was up to me, I would say, you know, on special request, we would consider potentially something above and beyond 6 units. And maybe that's something that's...
That process is already there. Anyone can seek a variance.
Right.
Currently.
So, I mean...
What's that? Sorry.
It'd be very difficult to get a variance. I mean, it's been tried before in town and it hasn't happened, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
But I just say, I think going potentially from 6 to 10 is something that seems reasonable. 6 to unlimited to me seems also unreasonable to me. So I think there is, but we're having this conversation to see what we all think makes the most sense for the town.
Yeah.
You know, I think just continuing the conversation will be helpful, and like Phil said, eventually it'll have to go to vote.
Right. I mean, at this point, I would like to focus our energy on providing feedback to June, and I do think it's worth at least following up and having a discussion about housing. Maybe we should all evaluate, take time to read the master plan and see what it says about density before our next meeting. I don't think we should wipe it off the table that we're not going to consider changing the maximum number of units from 6 to something else. I think it's a valid, we've had requests. I think we can consider it.
It's our town.
And ultimately, it's not our decision. All we can do is understand if there's enough support to put something to the voters.
But ultimately, it's the town's town. It's the people's town. It's not the guy that called up and didn't want to reveal, did or did not reveal who he's calling for. But I think this town is pretty special. And I think that I'm concerned about the 3 to 6 in the ag zone, that there's a lot of people that aren't aware of what's going on. And I think we bring the people in at the beginning and they all say, yeah, let's go unlimited, let's go 10, I think we need the people involved. And I think it's poor to just say, well, we're going to rely on the master plan because that's what we did in the past.
It's not what we did in the past. It's what's defined in statute. This is how the planning process
Oh
works.
yeah, I've been involved with 4 to 6. Probably four master plans I've been involved in this town.
I don't see the point in bringing people into that particular conversation until we have more data.
Exactly.
All we're doing right now is spouting personal opinions. We don't have data. And until we do, to explain to the people, the reason we're making this decision is this, this, and this, they're only going to have opinions too. And that's part of the problem with what we're facing right now with, for instance, COVID response. People don't have information.
So we had a master plan, and we put together an economic development committee, which I was involved with. We invited a group of people, and Frank was there. We had 3 meetings. Room was just about filled with people from Main Street. Yeah, we had a master plan, but these people identified what was really wrong. We ended up having 10, 15, well, probably 6 more meetings from that after we identified what their problem is that was never identified in the master plan. We then developed a parking committee, and we had 3 phases, and we're on phase 2 or 3 right now. But that never would have happened if we hadn't assembled the people from the Main Street business owners to help us to define, well, where direction do you want to see us go? So I think we can do the same thing with this planning board and find the people that want to sit down and talk and help us.
Can I just clarify a couple things? Sorry, I really do want to move on to.
That's fine. Go ahead.
When I mentioned before about 2 developers, I do want to make it clear that it wasn't the Lakes Region Group that we heard from. These are 2 for-profit developers, business people, and people you know. Sometimes I have conversations with people, but they have expressed that the 6th unit is a factor, okay? So, and I do not believe that it's necessarily any kind of subsidized housing that they're looking at.
I didn't say anything about subsidized housing.
We did hear that, so I want to make it clear, I was not talking about the Lakes Region Group, okay? Mike, you said something about you're concerned about more than 6 units in the agricultural zone, so maybe that's in a zone. This is one of the things I'm asking for input. We don't have to do this in every zone. I know you're very sensitive about the agricultural zone, so maybe we don't allow more than 6 in the agricultural zone. Keep in mind, we have a ski area that, has talked about developing, and I don't know what their future plans are. Maybe we can wait on that. But again, condominiums or something up there would be held to a 6-unit restriction. Maybe we can just go for more than that along Tenny Mountain Highway, in our multifamily zone, and in our village commercial zone, something like that. Those are the kinds of things I'm asking for input. So when I put things out there, it's not saying it's asking for input. That's what Susan is, and I'm asking her for input and trying to bring it forward. We can have her come to a meeting, again, but it's just, I'm trying to manage and be efficient with the limited time we have from her too. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that. I think I've given you a lot of information, and I will continue to do that, and then you have to have some time to think about it. There's no proposals on the table now. There's a lot going on. My goal for this year was, as much as anything, is to kind of clean up the general provisions to make the ordinance easier for staff in the town to administer, including possibly some definitions. There's a lot of areas where we need some updating. That's going to take some number of years. Housing is one that's a big issue in the state. This is why I'm proposing us to at least look at it, okay? And
I would like to note that there are multiple pages in the master plan that
Housing,
address economic development on Main Street, and the meeting that happened here is recommended in the implementation chapter. So what happened here is great. We're following the master plan. Good job.
Thank you, Phil. All right.
right, so
Why is that if we have a 6-unit limit, but we allow for special exceptions, why are you saying it's virtually impossible to get it through?
Variance.
Variance, sorry.
Variance.
because the standard to get a variance is very difficult, and the zoning board lately is just, they're really upholding the standards by law that are set up, so. Special exceptions are different. A variance, you really have to show some kind of hardship with the property itself, that there's no other, you can't do a use that's conforming with the property, and you almost always can. Hardship is not just financial hardship.
Can we move on from housing?
Can I mention one thing here? In our master plan, on page 50, it says, consider providing density bonuses when housing will be permanently affordable.
Again, we're not talking about
Yeah,
affordability,
right,
it's just,
right.
this is
And
another
that's something
simple
But,
way to,
but
yeah.
density bonuses, which kind of brings us back
There was a
to.
Without addressing that it has to be so many units, you know.
No,
If you go more than 6, it has to be 50%
you can deal with
for
density in other
affordability.
ways,
We can just
too,
allow
but-
more density.
Can we move to fences?
Yay!
Must we? But I guess
Thank you.
it's better to get out of there.
Let's just let the fences
Sweet.
sit for tonight. I
Okay.
gave you a handout. I will mail this out, but I really do intend, there was two, I started off with just one sheet, and then I got carried away looking at a few other communities to see what do they do about fences. So the first sheet is our conflict. So there's a little quiz at the top. Can you have a fence in the front side or rear setback? If so, do you need a special exception? Is that, if it can be 4 foot or greater 4 foot, can you have that in the front setback? And do fence rules apply to hedges? So tried to highlight some areas that we have so many conflicts around fences. So this
Creeks and
is,
ditches are qualify as fences.
I'd like to simplify this. And again,
I
I'm
agree.
just looking for answers to those questions. What do you want to do about fences? It's really hard for us to administer this because there's one place that says you can't do it, another place that says you can do it by special exception, another place sounds like you can do it. So, think about it. Think about what you think is appropriate for fences. I gave some examples. There's some, we want to have the same rules for commercial development, commercial uses versus residential, that kind of thing. In general, you want to have a lower fence at a corner so you're not obstructing sight lines. You know, there's sort of this idea of a triangle that some other, you know, I think we can look at this in a lot simpler way and remove these conflicts. And that's all I'm asking. But again, I don't know what, we want to go to 6-foot fences or 10-foot fences, 18-foot fences. just for fun. Just gotta throw out those numbers. Hope you see some humor here. All right, so keep that in mind, and any feedback you want to give me by email before the next meeting would be great, or we can keep this going. So the last piece was the calendar. I went through and looked at what by statute, and also
Revised calendar.
revised calendar. It gets it very shortened because of the need to, by law, have a public hearing. The time to get it, we should advertise in the Record Enterprise, our local paper. We've heard that from others. So their publication deadlines basically means for the first, we can have 2 hearings. For the last deadline that we can meet with our meeting schedule is January 6th for the first hearing and January 20th for the second. You have to decide, get the, you know, basically amendments ready to be advertised, you know, by December 17th at noon. So if you look at the table at the top, we basically have another meeting in October, you know, that we have no applications for the 21st. So I think we've got in 2 weeks another chance to talk about. Yeah. I do anticipate a couple of applications, or one of these may have been the Mountain Charter School. I'll have to go back and look at that for maybe November. But we have next couple meetings I think are a good time to kind of keep pushing on lots of paper
Yep.
and handouts.
So,
any
as
input
a
you
board,
have
we should be reviewing the master plan for guidance.
Right. But we really have, you know, by December 16th, finalize any zoning amendments in order to be able to publicize it by the 17th to meet the January 6th hearing date.
Seems like everything gets crammed into right now.
It
You know,
does.
it's like all summer, we've not addressed any of them, you know, just,
We've been
is
so
that
busy with
typical?
other things too, and that's, I
I
mean,
know, I understand that, and we all work, but it
Yeah.
just seems like
that's what happens.
cram it all in with all the ideas and try to get people involved and stuff. It just doesn't seem like the timing is right. It doesn't
Never,
give
but it
enough
hasn't
time.
been since 1961 when
Exactly.
it was adopted in some ways. You know, there is a challenge that always happens because you never know how many applications there's going to be or staffing issues. So I will say at one point, you know, we had in the capital improvement plan money set aside to really, you know, work with somebody to take a good hard look at this, but that never, I don't know what happened to that.
Look at me.
Maybe next year your assistant planner will help get
Yeah.
some of that done. Good. So we're gonna put
Matt-
fences on the
Matt
agenda
waiting
for next
or-
month. What's that?
Am I still waiting?
Matt, did you have other comments you wanted to share? I see that you've got your hand up.
Yes, I do.
Go for it.
Thank you. You know, I think, you know, Yeah, it's probably like 2 minutes. So, oftentimes, I hear just like outside looking in, is like, like Chief LaFave, when he was trying to, when we were trying to raise the prices of the parking in town, he rattled off to the select board, Nashua, Portsmouth, all these other towns, and his premise was on what these other towns are getting paid for parking. And then, reports come in that as the planning board of the town, has as resources to make better judgments. Reports come in with Londonderry and all these other towns that don't represent what Plymouth are. And, whether it's preservation, conservation, growth and development, whatever it might be, I'm not here to debate that at all. I just am wondering if the data that is brought in, and I don't know the answers, but if the data is brought in is, cognizant to the decisions that need to be made when, for example, like Campton PD, Campton police officer said, hey, I'm leaving because this town pays their officers $10,000 more. Well, that town had 60,000 people. So I think this looking at other towns that aren't what Plymouth are, I don't know if it's dangerous or the route we need to go, but I just want to make a comment to that where data's coming in, and it's not all of it, but where data's coming in and we're looking at numbers and or we're using comparisons to get more revenue from the townspeople. Is that really what Plymouth is though? So no, I appreciate your time and calling on me, once again, but I just want to make that point is, are the data sets and the data points accurately representative of Plymouth? And then I additionally acknowledge that it might not necessarily be what Plymouth is now, but what Plymouth is either trying to become or trying to avoid or mixture. So thank you again for your time. It's been nice joining you guys again tonight. Thanks.
All right. Does anyone else from the board have anything else for the agenda this evening? Anything to discuss?
I have one last just announcement.
Okay, that's fine.
I promise.
Yeah.
Just really quickly, yesterday, the town manager signed the contract to get for engineering services for the Economic Development Agency funded Economic Development Administration, EDA, the 3.3 million downtown drainage project. We've selected we had to go through a long process this summer to select engineering firm. We had 6 firms submit qualification statements, and ultimately there's a team of us that selected that felt HEB engineers from North Conway was the best ones for this project. And so we've been negotiating a contract for about a month with them, and so that was really exciting. That contract was signed yesterday, so the work will be beginning. I will be sending out an email shortly to businesses and people, but I want to make sure that, there's going to be engineers running around downtown Plymouth looking at things. This is a significant amount of work between the design, engineering, and construction inspection. The contract's $557,373. So
Just for the engineering.
just for the engineering. A lot of it's construction inspection because it's going to be a couple of years of. But it's a big project, so I want to keep it letting there's
Does the town
a
come out
lot
with
of
a
work behind the scenes.
timeline based on this at this point of what the goal is?
In the contract, there is a timeline. I can get that. I mean, we need to send that out, so I just kind of, again, scrambling to.
It'd be great to see that.
Yeah. And EDA has approved the contract and everything,
good.
so there's a lot of. I just want you guys to know that there's been a lot of time spent away from zoning ordinances and public input because we have to do these steps to follow the federal regulations. So.
Thank you. Great update.
I move we adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Motion to adjourn is non-debatable. Sorry, Frank.
Did he have something to say?
I was gonna, a couple comments. One, I think your best return on investment for time, money, and effort that the board sent is to continue the process of evaluating your definitions in the zoning ordinance, okay? That would, and to get the source document, if it's even the dictionary. I'll give you an example. There's 3 in our existing ordinances. First one is airport. our definition of an airport is Plymouth Municipal Airport. Well, that's not the definition of an airport. Second one we have is basement. And if you look in there, it puts you into the FEMA area about basements, and it says you cannot effectively use the definition in that sector of the flood zone for any other zone. So that's a technical infeasibility saying that we have no definition for basement. And the last one is trees, which is, our definition is anything of natural growth, like babies and planning board members. The dictionary says it's a tall wooded plant, which we might consider. The other thing, the reason we're doing drainage is because when I did the parking inventory for the whole downtown area, and along the way with the clipboard and counting every spot, they discovered that a lot of the Main Street area had no drainage. And so I started working with the town transportation person on it, and I have got the maps from the study back in '85 of the drainage system in South Main Street. And the town is responsible for the stormwater drainage. And the water and sewer project, which is meant to go south, is to split that system, but we had no system in place. So that put them off because we didn't want to dig up Main Street twice. But again, source document of definitions to verify where we use a definition, we should be able to say this definition comes from, if it doesn't come from us or the dictionary, it comes from either the Federal Code of Federal Regulations or state RSAs. They all have in their listing the intent and purpose of the law and the definitions. And that has been one of our hardest part when someone makes an application to try to comply with our zoning ordinance, land use regulations, is, well, I thought this definition was this. So I would really like to support the efforts of the town planner in this definitions thing, because that is the most important thing that we can do to talk with each other along with the citizens, so that we have a commonality of understanding with the words we're using. Otherwise, you get into all kinds of issues in the application. And thank you very much for this, your meeting here. It's very good to see the boards working.
Thank you, Frank. All right.
Aye.
All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.